Hello, and welcome to Central Booking, where writers and readers are the authority. I'm your host, John Valeri. Today, I have the privilege of speaking with business owner, proud mom, and inspirational writer Bethany Harvey. Bethany is the author of the recently released memoir, Dipped in It, which was written following the death of her father, among other significant life changes, and features cover art by her daughter, Beau. Though born from sadness, the book is at times as humorous and healing as it is heartrending. In the words of Monica Rogers, founder of the Revelation Project, Bethany has an uncanny way of speaking directly to the heart about what it means to be on this messy human journey. She writes with a grace that stays with you long after you turn the final page. This book is a revelation. We have all lost people or things that are meaningful to us. Bethany's book is a poignant reminder that while grief is unique to each individual, it's also a universal emotion, and that while we may feel alone, we never truly are alone. Bethany Harvey's wish for others is that we all remain dipped in it despite our times of difficulty. After all, where there's grief, there can also be gratitude, as you're about to hear for yourselves. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Central Booking. Tonight, I am speaking to Bethany Harvey, who is the author of the memoir, Dipped in It, which is available right now. Welcome to the show, Bethany.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
You say that now. We'll see.
Yeah, we'll see.
No, but I feel very privileged, to be able to talk to you. I almost used the word excited, and then I thought, this is a memoir of grief, so people might get the wrong idea. But in reading this book and having gone through that process myself a couple of times with people very close to me, it was a really, I think, poignant reminder that grief is very unique to the person, but it's sort of also universal and something that we all go through, even if we go through it in our own particular way. And, so many people, we feel like we are alone. And then you read something like your book and realize that that's not the case. Everybody's going through something, and, hopefully we're all just getting through it. So that was a great reminder for me. And I figured I would start with the incredibly obvious, but I think it's very telling too. So the title of this book is Dipped in It, and it's more than just a title. So can you tell us what the significance of that phrasing is, and also why it's representative of the book to come?
Sure. First of all, I just want to say thank you in that intro for saying that the book made you feel less alone, because to me, I feel like that's the greatest compliment that I could get for it. And so dipped in it is an expression that my father used to use to express somebody being very lucky. He would use it with me if I just pulled out some unexpected victory, or, we were playing a game or something and you roll doubles or whatever. He would always say, you're dipped in it. And I had never actually heard anyone else use that expression. And after he died, I actually Googled it because I thought, did he make that up? Is that an expression? And I looked it up, and it said someone who's particularly lucky or blessed over a long period of time. So when I gave my father's eulogy, I talked about how I felt that he always knew that he was dipped in it. Sorry, there goes my dog. That he always knew he was dipped in it. And so that ended up kind of being a somewhat ironic title to the book about him having died. That's where it came from. Hopefully the dog will stop in a second.
Yeah, that's what they do. I'm like animals. Now the video will go viral. There's a dog happening,
Yeah.
But yeah, I have to say, I love the title, and I'd never heard that expression or that phrase either. I didn't look it up, but it's sort of like you said, it's ironic, but it's perfect for a book like this. And so I wanted to ask you too about sort of the process of writing, because I find, that writing can be sort of cathartic and confessional in ways that maybe other communication isn't. And so I was wondering if you can talk about your relationship with the written word and how that helped you to process your feelings in a way that maybe you couldn't otherwise.
Oh, my relationship with the written word. I have always loved writing. I kind of think of it as it's kind of an interesting puzzle for me, trying to find the right words and phrasing to get across what I'm trying to say. So I've always enjoyed that part of it. And I think it's probably something that I should have always taken up and done more. And before we started recording, you and I were talking about dark humor, and, a little bit of dark humor to say, like, I kind of feel like life kept handing me all of these challenges, like, write about this, write about this, write about
Right.
this. And I kept saying, no, no, no. And then all of a sudden, like, the ground came out from underneath me and I was like, okay, I guess I will now. But what actually happened was I was feeling in such a low place. Again, after a series of life events that just kind of like turned my world upside down a few times. And then my father passed, and it was sort of like, that would have been devastating just in and of itself. But on the heels of kind of the upheaval that I'd been experiencing, it just was just devastating for me. It was just like the last straw, and I just found myself in a place where I just hated my own company. And I used to have a nickname, Sunshine, when I was younger. My brother's friends still call me that. And I just was so not sunshiny and so not familiar with being in this dark well. And so I went on social media, as one does, right? And decided at the lowest moment of my entire life that I was going to tell everyone that I was going to write a gratitude post every day for a year, a whole year, which is ridiculous, really. But I did it. I started doing it for about maybe a week. And then I realized that I didn't need to write about, how I loved warm lavender baths and, walking in the woods in the rain, and needed to actually write about the fact that I wanted to crawl out of my own skin and I couldn't stand myself. So I did that. And what I found was this community of people who all were so relieved that somebody said it, that, somebody said that they were feeling miserable, and it wasn't this rosy picture that everyone puts out on social media. And it was relatable to people. And so I started to hear like this chorus of people around me saying, I know how you feel. I felt that way, or I feel that way right now. And that just made me braver and braver to explore how I was feeling and share it with people. And so I did do it for a year. It just wasn't about gratitude every day.
Right.
Some days it was, and some days it was very light, and other days it was very heavy, and I was weeping as I was typing what I wanted to say. And while I was doing it, people kept saying, you should write a book, you should write a book. But at the time I was just trying to get through the next day,
Sure.
And but once I finished it all, I thought, you know what, this is a book. I do have a book. I have already written a book.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
that's how it all happened. I would say sometimes I liken my writing to going to the gym, which I never do, by the way. But like how I imagine people feel when they go to the gym. They don't want to go and do it, but when they're finished, they feel really great about
That's
themselves.
true.
It was like if I, actually sat down to write something, even when I really didn't feel like it, I felt better afterwards. I felt good about getting whatever it was off my chest.
Sure. So,
Yeah.
couple quick things. One, you just reminded me of something when you brought up the gym, which is like a dirty word. Oh my gosh. But it is. It's like a discipline. And I remember I worked a job once, and one of the perks of being an employee there was you got like a discounted gym membership, but you had to pay for an entire year. And I said to myself, well, like if I make that commitment, I will go. I never saw the inside of that gym, like ever.
I have
Never.
fallen for that trick too.
Yeah.
I think it was as silly as it sounds, it was kind of the accountability piece of, in particular, having a few different people in my life who were like, where's your gratitude post today, or where's your post today, or as more people started reading it, I would get messages like, we're waiting, you haven't written anything today. And so it was that kind of public accountability, whereas nobody needs to know if you don't go to the gym. So that definitely helped me. And so I always catch myself now when people say like, are you going to write another book, or are you writing another book? It's like, I can't say I don't have time.
Right.
because I didn't have time before, but I
Right.
made
But you did
myself
it.
do it every day. My girls were younger. I started writing it in 2017, so 4 years ago, and was very strict about bedtime, so they, got into bed at 7:30, and that's usually when I did my writing. And sometimes I would sit down to write, and I would just literally have no idea what I was gonna say.
Sure.
But most days, I thought about it during the day. Either I would write about something that I noticed that day that made me have a thought about whatever. I love metaphors, and some days, if I just didn't really know, I would write a story about something that happened, a long time ago in my childhood, or I would pick. Not all of these made it into the book, but throughout the year, I would pick different friends and family and write something just about them. And so some of those aren't in it just because wasn't part of the flow of the story,
Right.
and the book would have been twice as long if I had included every single thing I wrote during that period of time.
Right.
So we had to kind of trim it down a little bit, but yeah, it was a really good process for me during that time, because it really made me pay attention to everything, noticing something beautiful, really listening and paying attention to what somebody said so that I
Right.
could expound upon it later. And yeah, just it made me more present.
Sure.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So let
Yeah.
me ask you too, and this is probably a natural follow-up to that, but when you started this writing, it seems like it was private or relatively private. There were some people who were reading it who at that point already knew you. So can you talk about the decision, to make it public and then sort of pursue the path to publication? Because again, you're taking your world and you're now exposing it to an entirely different audience of people who probably don't know you. And so that sort of comes with its own challenges and considerations. So can you just speak to that for a moment and how you sort of weighed the benefits versus risks of taking your private life and exposing it to people like me?
I just had this like really weird metaphor while you were saying all of that, just about like um might sound really weird. So you can cut this part out, John, if it's too strange of a thing to say.
We
But it
like
was
that
sort of
here.
like taking my clothes off like one piece at a time, starting with all of these layers on and removing them, I think was a different experience than it would have been just like throwing everything off and
Right.
jumping into the freezing ocean or whatever. So it was sort of like I revealed myself gradually, and there were some things like from reading the book, but I really didn't, haven't led with this in any of my advertising or media or whatever, because it's not the main focus of the story. But my ex-spouse came out as transgender within the year before my father passed, and I wrote about that. But when I was writing my daily things on Facebook, I didn't write about that until things were kind of blowing up about the whole transgender bathroom issue. And I was really feeling frustrated by people that I saw on social media who, to me, were really nice, good people who were posting these like comical
Right.
names. I always say that wrong. Is it memes or memes? My
I think
daughters
it's
will crack up
memes.
if they see me. These comical memes about transgender people and
Right.
making it a joke. And at that point in time, a lot of people weren't aware of what was going on in our lives. And I thought, how many people, not that you shouldn't be kind to everyone regardless of whether you know someone who's transgender or not, but how many people aren't even aware that they know somebody who is transgender, or that people that they're putting these jokes out to on Facebook love someone who's transgender.
Right.
Maybe their little 3-year-old child is transgender, and at some point they're going to reveal that. And how are they going to feel in that moment when they've been making jokes about it? So at that point, I asked my spouse if I could write about, what was going on with us to, I don't know, help bring it closer to home for people, I guess. And so I only started writing about that after we had that conversation, which was probably about, I know it was in the summer. So, it was like 4 or 5 months into when I had been writing. So I guess my point is, like, when I pulled in things like that, I made sure it was okay first, because it wasn't just about me or how I was feeling. And when I was writing about, other people in my life, they were all, positive stories. So I never felt like, oh no, I'm, saying something horrible about somebody and they're going to get upset about it. There was no element of that, really. I also, what started to happen was when I was writing things that were more revealing, more raw, more vulnerable, the more I felt that about it, the more nervous that I was to hit post, the more people connected with it.
Right, yeah.
And that I found so fascinating, because it just tells you how universal these feelings are, and everybody's carrying them around. And it's like, I would get these, lots of people would comment on things that I wrote, but then I'd also get all these messages on the side, like, oh my God, how did you get in my head? Did you read my diary? This is exactly how I feel, or exactly how I felt. And that's really fascinating to me. The things that we're so worried to reveal are things that everybody is thinking or feeling at some point. And so the more I realized that, the less scary it got to, just say how I was feeling, because I knew that I wasn't alone, and I knew I was helping other people to know that they weren't alone.
Right. And it's almost like the more vulnerable you are, the more liberation there is sort of in that. And I wanted to ask you about that too, because, you write about being sort of authentic or genuinely vulnerable in the presence of your daughters, and how you found that it was really important, to do that and to show them that there is sort of strength in vulnerability. So not only, are you showing that to the world now, but you chose to show that to your children. So can you talk about why that was, important for you to allow your children to see that side of you and how that benefits their own development?
Yeah, well, there was this moment that I wrote about in the book when the girls and I were visiting a friend, and she and I were talking, and my children were sitting on the other side of the room drawing, and one of my children drew this picture of this woman, and her face was split in half. And it was like, one side, her hair was like this golden yellow. I still have it on my camera. It's fascinating, but she's wearing a crown, and one side of her face is like blues and greens, and the other side is yellows and golds. And half of her crown has flowers and the other half has thorns. And her mouth was actually smiling on one side and sad on the other. And I was just blown away by it. And I thought, she sees all of me, Yeah. So I don't even think it's a matter of revealing or not revealing. I think it's a matter of, they see it anyway. So it's a matter of whether you're showing them that you're ashamed of the tears, or that it's not okay to be sad, or if you're just saying, yes, I'm sad, and this is what it looks like, and I'm also okay, and I'm not going to be sad forever, and but I will be sad again. And it just is how life is. And so yeah, I think it's not so much about revealing your whole self to your kids. It's about honoring it and showing them that the whole of you is okay.
I love that. And all right, I have to ask you, let me give you another mom brag opportunity. Let me just hold this book up again. Like, look at this cover. It's gorgeous. And it was illustrated by your daughter. And I actually, some people know that I lost a brother a few years ago. I also have a friend who recently and unexpectedly lost her brother. And so we've sort of been in communication a bit more because we can obviously relate on that level. And so I was reading this book and finding myself really relating to it and telling her, you should read this maybe when you're in a space where you can. And she's like, all right, what is it? I'm going to look it up and read a sample. And sometimes it's just easier to take a picture than, type everything out. So I sent her a picture of the book and she was like, oh my God, that cover is gorgeous. And so then I'm like, yeah, well, the author's daughter, who's like a third of our age, did that. And then we all felt really terrible about our artistic abilities, but also very impressed by her. So can you just talk about that for a moment?
Sure. So when we were getting ready to publish it, I worked with Worldchangers Media. My book is actually only the second book that came out from that company. So shout out to Worldchangers Media and Brian Haynes, who's my publisher. And there was a designer working on it, and they gave me a few different cover design ideas, mock-ups, I guess they call them. And I just had this image in my head of a woman drinking a cup of tea, because I really felt like I wanted the book to feel like when you're reading it, you're just sitting down with a good friend and talking about all of your feelings. So I just said to Bo, this is a thought I had, hands holding a cup of tea, and there are all of these colors inside, because at the end of the book I talk about painting a picture of your life and all of the colors. And so I said, I don't know if we're going to use it. I didn't want to make any promises, but I said, see what you can do, and we'll throw it in the mix with these other ideas. And she did it on her iPad, and we all just loved it and knew immediately that it was the right one.
Yeah, she captured it beautifully. And, for someone like me who cannot do justice to stick figures, very impressed by that. And, speaking of your daughters, I wanted to ask you, also, I mean, obviously they're a great source of comfort and joy to you, but I wanted to ask you about the wisdom of children, because there are so many things that your daughters said to you that sort of gave you new perspective. And it's amazing because you think, children, they haven't lived as much as we do. What do they really know? And then come to find out they know a whole lot. And sometimes they say something that's completely life altering. So would you be able to speak to that for a moment as well? Some of the wisdom that you've gotten from your girls?
Well, again, part of that was just like really paying attention and just hearing these little nuggets of things that they would come out with. And it was a fascinating part of it, really. And I think, I don't know, they're just part of them still lives on a different realm, I think, or in a different, their just whole perception of the world is so different. And I don't know, maybe we just pile all this stuff or life piles all this stuff onto us as adults, and they don't have all of that weighing them down yet, so they can see things very clearly, I think. And it's fascinating. Yeah.
Yeah, there are some great insights. And I was like, wow, to be a child again and to think that profoundly and simply, I loved it. Simple and profound at the same time. It's kind of that dichotomy, but it's terrific. And so, okay, so, we touched upon humor sort of really briefly before, but I wanted to come back to that because a lot of times, people think a book about grief is going to be a downer. And obviously there are those moments, but it's sort of heartbreaking and hilarious at the same time. So can you talk about the role of humor in your life, how that sort of helped sustain you, and how that really is sort of a very big part of the stories that you share here?
Sure. The funny thing about that is, I don't know. I mean, if somebody asked me, do you have a good sense of humor? I would say, yes, I have a good sense of humor, but I certainly didn't try to be funny in my posts, really. It's just sort of like, as with the ones that were very dark or sad, it was just like what was in my head is what came out. And so since I published the book, when I was writing the blogs, a couple of times people would say to me, like, you're really funny, but it was never like the main adjective or the main compliment, right, if you want to call it a compliment. Right. But when I put out the book, I started hearing from a lot of people, I was really surprised at how much I laughed, or, I was bawling my eyes out and then found myself like snort laughing. And it was really like a relief to be brought to this kind of really dark place and then be, unexpectedly find myself laughing. And so I started to think about that quite a bit and think, like, is that really strange for like a book that's about grieving that people are saying it's funny? And I started to look into all of these different podcasts that are about grieving with humor and dark humor, and I really feel like I found my people because there are actually a lot of grief podcasts that are maybe not 100% focused on the funny aspects of it, but I'll take those funny parts into consideration. So I've really appreciated the people who are able to just say, yes, there's a really funny part of this. And I did an interview the other day for the podcast Death is Hilarious with Tawny Plattis. And I keep telling people about what I heard her say in an interview, which was that humor is really just poking fun at or pointing out the absurd. And for somebody who has lost somebody who is so important to them, there's nothing more absurd than that. It's ridiculous. It's the most insane thing ever. So it's only natural, I think, for there to be some humor involved with grieving, because you find yourself in this situation that's obviously so heartbreaking and also ridiculous. Like, how can this be? How can the world still be going on?
Right. Yeah.
Why isn't everything stopped?
You're right. There is so much.
So I just went to like a really sad, dark place with that question about humor,
but it's true. Like, you're right. There is absurdity in the situation. And I think for a reader too, reading this, I think the majority of us have probably had those thoughts and then said, well, can we say this aloud? Can we express it? And so reading something like this is like, yes, that is acceptable. It's okay. Other people feel the same way. And like I said before, like, I worry, when you can't laugh anymore, like when the laughter stops, that's when I think the real problems, begin. So, but I like too to tell people that this is not a book that's just going to make you sad and remind you of your own losses. It's also going to give you an opportunity to recognize that absurdity and then laugh at it, because you need to. And I think it really is a great coping mechanism. And so one other thing I wanted to come back to, and you broached this a little bit earlier too, is, the idea that grief and gratitude aren't mutually exclusive. And I really related because you were saying, you initially had the intent of doing a year-long gratitude journal. And, I sort of tried to start the same thing with my mom after a few months. She was in a really dark place. And so I'm like, well, we got to do something to shift perspective a little bit and think about the lighter things in life. And so we got, look, a cat. Oh, cute.
We've got the dog to calm down, and now we've got the cat.
Well, they're stars. They need to be.
Yeah, you just wait for the pet squirrel and raccoon to come around. You just wait.
We'll get the menagerie. But so, so we got this gratitude book, and we started sitting down every day and trying to think of something that we were still grateful for, whether it was, a nice day or a good cup of coffee. And that lasted for maybe 2 weeks. And, my poor mom, on top of being in this dark place, she's also sort of compromised from the stroke. So communication is very difficult. So even if she's able to think of something that she's grateful for, she might not be able to verbalize it. So it's, I don't know, maybe it was a futile effort. And to get back to it though, can you talk a little bit about that idea that grief and gratitude are not mutually exclusive? They can coexist, and there is importance in that.
Yes. I mean, because I think it's this idea of this toxic positivity where we just, it's the good vibes only, and I think we kind of make ourselves feel like we're a bad person if we're not grateful all the time, because we have a beautiful family, a roof over our heads, a great job, wonderful children, whatever our gratitude may be. We can put ourselves into a place where we're like, if I'm not appreciating all of these things all the time, I'm the worst, right?
Right.
So, and sometimes life is just really freaking hard. And you have to allow yourself to just say, like, I'm not in the most grateful place right now. But that doesn't mean that I'm not a grateful person. I get to feel whatever I'm feeling. And that doesn't negate all of the things that I'm grateful for. And that was really something that I had to learn, because really, I didn't realize it until later. Actually, when I was even writing the foreword to the book, or the introduction, whatever you call it. When I was writing that, I realized what I was trying to do with the gratitude journal was to just skip over the grief. Right. And I just wanted to pretend it never happened and go to my grateful place, think about all the happy things, and that was going to be it. And I wasn't going to have to grieve anymore because I was going to be in a place of gratitude. And that it's just not the reality. It's not the reality. And so it was a process of getting over that feeling of, if I admit that I just feel like the world is the worst right now, and that I hate everything, that doesn't mean that I actually do hate everything. And there's no black and white. It all gets to belong.
Yeah, absolutely. I know. And I feel like, I've become sort of the master compartmentalizer. And then reading this book, it's like, oh man, that box is somewhere in my head, and someday it's going to pop open and we're all in for a world of trouble. But, it is sort of that universal struggle. There are days that you wake up and you find yourself really happy to be alive. And then you're like, the thoughts creep in, and then you're like, well, dad can't enjoy this day, brother can't enjoy this day. That kind of sucks. And then you have to remind yourself that they would be the first people to tell you that life is for the living, and you are living. You should probably try to enjoy it while you have the opportunity to.
Yeah. You're being gratitude shamed by people who are dead. I mean, that's true. That's pretty messed up.
Yeah, and it's like their voices are in your head.
Yeah.
And I always tell myself, my brother, when he was sick, obviously, he knew that there was not going to be a happy ending, but while he still could, he did, so many things. He was very active, and he did things. He saw people. He was more open probably in those last few years than he was in all of the years prior to that. And I'm like, if he could embrace that, while he was sick, then I can sort of embrace that while I'm healthy, and it seems like probably the thing to do. So it gives me a bit of perspective. But yeah, like you said, it's funny, those voices you hear in your head, and you do get shamed. And
yeah, don't shit on yourself.
That's right.
You feel shamed. How you feel, and that's all right.
Yeah. But you get schooled a little bit too. But I wanted to ask you.
Well, too. I think even just the interesting thing about writing a book when you're grieving is I don't know if you noticed it, but I was kind of on a roller coaster all the time, and I think they were like, it was down here, and then things started to go better, and then some really hard things happened. Yeah. And, but even from day to day, I remember, so the Christmas, my father has heart attack on December 27th, and the Christmas, 2 days before was the first Christmas that I didn't have my children with me. And I just wanted to crawl into a hole and get through the day. But I didn't, I went through the motions. I did all the things. And then the day after, 2 days after, my dad had his heart attack. And I remember feeling this like awful, like shame and remorse about the fact that was my last Christmas with my dad. Right. And I was so fixated on not having my children with me that maybe I didn't enjoy the Christmas with my dad as much as I should have. you can really get yourself into like a crazy mind trap when you go down rabbit holes like that. And so then, you know, a lot of times in the book, I kind of go, you know, weave back and forth between that, like try to enjoy every moment to like, you cannot enjoy every moment, and that's okay.
It's true.
You know, so it's, grieving is hard.
Yeah.
Grieving is hard, and it is a roller coaster. And you do have these moments where you have this clarity where you're like, oh, you know, I need to enjoy all of this because I'm so lucky. And you really feel that. It's not a, you know, it's not a put on, it's not a performance. But then, you know, you weave back and forth, and then, you know, the next minute you might have a moment where you're like, this really sucks. Why did this happen? And like I said, it all gets to belong.
Yeah, no, so true. And then you just remind yourself we are all human. And I think reading something like your book, it's that reminder that we sort of all go through these extremes, and we sometimes feel like we are alone in it, like we are completely crazy, like, you know, what we're feeling, nobody else has ever felt before. And then you're like, okay, you know, we all probably have those extremes, whether or not we realize it in other people. It's there. It doesn't always show itself, but it's
Mm-hmm.
there.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's there. But one thing I wanted to ask you about too, because I think that I related to this, and I'm sure so many other people can, is, you know, you're going through this grieving process and people are aware of that. And they don't always, you know how to approach you, what to say, what to do. And then on top of that, you know, there's our own sort of need to shun help and not really be open to accepting people who are trying to help us. And then, you know, you came to a place where you were able to finally embrace the fact that people wanted to help you. And I think for you, you know, being a mom and a business owner, I mean, you had a lot of stuff going on in addition to your grief, and probably really could have benefited from the help, and eventually did. So can you talk about that process and why it really is, you know, helpful and important to allow people to do nice things for you in times of need?
Yeah, that's a hard one, because I think as a culture, what we do is bring the meals and do all the things for the first month or the first few weeks, and then there's sort of this unspoken moment where it's like, okay, well, they must be fine now.
Yeah, right.
And we're not, right? So I think, for me, it was two things. The meals kept going on and things for longer than I thought they were supposed to. So that was an uncomfortable piece for me. And like I wrote about in the book, when a friend of mine said to me, just shut up and take the food. Like, people want to do something nice for you, they don't know what to do, so they make food, and it's okay. Just keep
Yeah.
taking it. Just take it. Take it and say thank you and enjoy the meal. So there was that part of it, of like it going on longer than I thought it should, because I thought it said something about me or what people thought about my capacity for handling the situation, which isn't what it's about at all. We make a lot of stuff about ourselves that isn't.
True.
But then I think, the other piece of it is, after all of that goes away, it's not that people don't want to help you anymore. It's that everybody gets busy in their lives and they're doing their own things, and you probably pop into their head, you know, multiple times a day of, oh, I should check in on this person, or what could I do that would be nice for that person? But then, you know, the whole day goes by and you haven't done it. And so I think it's important to ask, because people still want to help you just as much, but they don't know what to do, or, you know, they just don't know that you need help in a particular area. So that was another obstacle for me, kind of just as a single parent and business owner, someone who just kind of felt like she had to have control of, you know, the different realms and have it handled. Delegating has never been a good skill of mine. It's one that I'm still working on in some areas of my life. But I think actually there's a beauty in getting to a point in your life where you're so low that you have to say, like, I can't do this. And noticing the people that step forward and say, what can I do? How can I help? um, it's a very beautiful, a beautiful revelation in a relationship when you have those people that are just ready to do whatever you need. But sometimes they just don't know what that is. And sometimes you don't know what that is. So that makes it harder too.
So true.
But just acknowledging that they want to be there for you in whatever way that looks like.
Sure. It's so true. A lot of times you don't even know what you need until someone, gives you the answer. And then it's like, oh, and you do learn a lot about, people too. It's interesting, you go through this sad process, but it really can bring you, closer to people. And sometimes people you never would have expected. Like, I feel I relate to some people differently than I probably ever would have otherwise. And it's just, it's interesting. So a couple more questions for you, and then I will let you get back to living life outside of this little box that we're in. But I wanted to ask you, this book, was written sort of pre-pandemic. And it's out in the world now. And obviously, so many of us have suffered losses, and not just in terms of, people and loved ones, but also sort of in terms of, lifestyle and how we were accustomed to living versus, maybe how we're living now. So I'm wondering if you can just talk about what the response has been, how you found that this is resonating, with readers in this sort of new world that we're all stumbling through.
Yeah, one of the things that I've really come to realize is that grief very much isn't just about losing a loved one. Grief, I heard it defined recently as the loss of something that you loved, whether it was a person you loved or a lifestyle that you loved or a job that you loved. And so I think we've been going through a collective grief phase, all of us in some way or another, for the last year and a half. And so I think in that way, it's like the perfect timing for this sort of book to just point out, like I said, that it's okay to feel all of the things that come up. And so I would say what we've all been going through has kind of made this book more relevant to everyone, and not just people who have lost people. Although now we've had, so many people have lost people in the last year and a half, for sure. So there's that added just sheer volume of people that have been going through that sort of grief. There's a tricky piece of it, and I tried to kind of get the right words for it the other day. I had read somewhere or heard somewhere, I wish I knew what the source was, but that grief is our greatest opportunity for personal growth. And I acknowledge that I would have told someone to go pound sand if they had said that to me, any time before I was ready. I'm not even going to put a time limit on that. Because there may be people who never want to hear that. But I think there has to be a time, or I'm not going to say has to be, that's not fair. People need to navigate things the way they will. But I will say, for me, getting to a place where I can say that this has been a great opportunity for personal growth for me without making it mean that I'm grateful for the loss or for the pain or that my father isn't here. There's nothing that I wouldn't do to have him back. So it's separating those things. So, acknowledging that all of this heartbreak that we go through actually does change us and can change us in beautiful ways and in heartbreaking ways. But I think separating that piece of it from the death in a way of, like I said, not saying, I'm glad this happened to me because it was the opportunity for me to grow. No, it's not that. But it's just acknowledging both, that it can be both. We can wish this didn't happen, with all of our hearts, but we also can acknowledge that the fact that it happened changed the way that we are, who we are fundamentally, I think.
Yeah, I mean, that's such an important point, and I think you're right. And I keep finding myself, the older I get, the more I've experienced, I realize that it is really the most difficult times that present those opportunities, and that, you can't change what happened, but you can change who you are going forward and how you sort of think about those things. And to, sort of come to a lighter area, I wanted to ask you too, you talk in the book
Please.
about, yeah, I know, right? But something I love is that you talk about how obviously, your father isn't here and yet he is, maybe not physically, but you continue to feel his presence and you continue, to have a relationship with him. And I know there was a point in the book too where you tell a story about, there was a hawk that brushed by you. And I know that hawks are really significant to my mom too. She sees them and she thinks of my brother and my father, and the days that she sees hawks tend to be very good days. And the days that they don't want to come out, I'm like, oh boy, she gets mad.
Wow.
But I'm just wondering if you can talk about, how your dad is still here and you are still having a relationship with him despite the loss.
Yeah. I remember in the beginning, it was kind of frustrating. Like he's here all the time but not here,
Right.
on the other side of the veil, however you would say it. And so it was difficult. And actually, I remember trying to comfort my mother and saying to her, he's still here. And bless her, because she wasn't having it. And she just got really mad and said, what difference does it make if he's here? He's
Right.
not here. I don't care. And then it was probably, 9 or 10 months later, she said to me, I got very tearful one day, and we were in the house and in her house, and I said something about how, when I hear somebody at the door, I still think it could be Dad. And she said, well, he is still here. And it was so comforting to me that she had gotten to that place.
Right.
And it was the truth. They are still here. And I hope that never goes away. One thing, I used to have quite a lot of dreams about my dad, and I haven't really had any lately, which makes me a little sad. But yeah, I still feel him here. One of my children was having a very difficult day a few weeks ago, and we were sitting on my bed together, and she was very tearful. And we had this sliding glass door in my bedroom. And as we were sitting there, this hawk came and landed in a tree right outside the sliding glass door. And it's not always that, symbolism, but it's just like when I do see a hawk, I feel like I'm being watched over. But a lot of times it's just like a stupid joke that comes into my head, and it's like I can almost feel him laughing with me.
Right.
And I don't know if you've had the opportunity to see the show Only Murders in the Building. Have you watched that at all?
But it's on my list.
It's on Hulu. And my dad loves Steve Martin, and watching that show is just, I feel like I'm watching it with him, because I just like every facial expression, and I just feel like he would die over this and think it was so funny. And so you still have those shared moments, which I think are so lovely, where instead of saying, I mean, of course you're saying to yourself, I wish they were here, but you almost kind of get to that point where you're just like, they are enjoying this with me. And I can remove that, like, I wish they were, from the sentence, and just say, like, we're having this joke together, or, I know he saw that, or he's hearing that.
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah. I had one of those moments myself recently. I mean, obviously, I'm a big reader, and my dad was a big reader too, but we read very different things. He was really, history, nonfiction, and then like Clive Cussler and Tom Clancy and stuff like that.
Yeah,
And
my
I'm,
dad too.
more mystery, suspense, thriller. But occasionally I will read something that he very much would have enjoyed. Like recently, I did an interview with somebody who writes historical mysteries set around World War II, and like that was my dad's thing. So reading that, it's like I feel, closer to him. Like he really would have appreciated this, but maybe he still is. This is something that we have in common. So it's interesting when you find those things, and it really is kind of comforting. And I think as your mom's, experience sort of conveys, it's all on our own timetables as to when we can receive that, when we can be receptive to it. But those things sort of are there. Okay. Last question for you, sort of a variation on a question that I ask everybody, because people are always looking for, advice or words of guidance when it comes to living or writing or creative life. So let me ask you, given what you've gone through and the experience of writing this book, are there any words of advice or encouragement that you would offer, to other people who've suffered losses and are looking for some kind of creative outlet to work through their own grieving process?
I thought you were going somewhere different with that question. And I thought you were going to ask me just generally about, giving advice to people who want to be writing, but they're not writing. And I was going to say, people are going to hate what I'm going to say, which is just that you have to make the time and carve out a time and just do it.
True.
Which I'm having a hard time, following my own advice right now, because I'm always thinking I don't have time. But as far as processing grief, I think even if you don't think of yourself as being like a talented writer, or even if you don't think anyone else is ever going to read it, or you don't ever want to show anybody what you've written, I think that just writing is so cathartic, and just getting everything out. And so I would definitely recommend a journal or a diary, even if you want to burn every page as you write it so that no one ever reads your words. It doesn't have to be for anyone other than you, but I think it's such a valuable tool to process. It really, I don't know, at least for me, sometimes even when I'm writing something, I'll think that I'm writing about one thing, and then I'll get into it, and then I think this is not what I need to say at all. It's actually this. And like things would just like reveal themselves to me as I was writing it, like the truth of what my thoughts were would come out. And there's something there that unlocks when you're writing, at least for me. And I think it's incredibly valuable.
Yeah, that's terrific advice. And, speaking of incredibly valuable, I mean, I think that your book is that. And I want to thank you so much for being here, for sharing your story, because, it's so difficult to experience this grief and then to share it with the world. And then, you sort of start to make peace with it, and then you have to sort of relive it for the benefit of others. I'm sure it's not always, easy or fun to talk about those experiences when people like me come knocking on your door saying, hey, would you mind sharing this with us? But it is so important. And I think it reminds us of all, how we're connected, and regardless of our circumstances, there are things that we are all dealing with. And we really are united in that. So thank you so much for sharing your story so that we can remember that.
Oh, thank you. That's very kind. I appreciate that.
Yeah, well, it's a real pleasure to have you here. And I really hope that people will check out Dipped in It by Bethany Harvey. Terrific book and great artwork too. Thank you again.
Thank you so much.
That's it for this episode of Central Booking. Thanks for watching, and be sure to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss a thing.